The following podcast is brought to you by Iconic Nation Media. Welcome to Season 5 of Level Up Podcast. I'm your host, Kimberly Levy. I'm here to guide you on a journey of personal growth and fulfillment. Join me as we delve into the challenges of both business and personal life, aiming to discover our true selves and connect more deeply with the world around us. On this podcast, we'll explore the topics that inspire and empower us to become the best version of ourselves. From book reviews to interviews with iconic individuals, we'll have insightful conversations that resonate with your journey. And a big thank you to our sponsors, the Boys and Girls Club of America, Greater Conejo Valley, and Levy's Deli for supporting the show and helping us bring these valuable discussions to you. Please share, rate, and review the podcast. And thank you so much for listening. You can also leave your comments at Kimberly Levy on social media. Thank you for your feedback and thank you for listening.
What I realized was that the people who had both success and happiness had consonance, alignment, flow, this sort of harmony in their lives. And it was really made up of four things. The first being calling. So what is the gravitational force in your life that gets you up? What is the business you want to build, the leader you want to serve, the societal ill that you want to solve, the family you want to nurture, right? Like, what is your calling? Number two, do you have connection? Does the work that you're doing every single day actually get you closer to that calling or farther from that calling? What's in your inbox, your to-do list, your calendar? Are those things actually moving you towards that calling? Is your work connected? Connection's all about the work. Contribution's really all about you. Does this work contribute to the life you want to have, the lifestyle you'd like to live, the flexibility you're looking for, the luxury that you want?
Hello, everyone. Today we have Laura Gassner-Otting, as an author, catalyst, and mindset executive coach who inspires audiences to overcome doubt and embrace greater changes beyond their current beliefs. With decades of experience spanning startup, corporate, nonprofit, political, and philanthropic sectors, Laura empowers people to find their voice and tackle their ambitious goals. From her beginnings as a presidential appointee in Bill Clinton's White House, where she helped shape AmeriCorps, to serving as the youngest vice president at a nationally respected search firm, to founding and leading and selling one of the fastest growing search firms in the country, Laura's journey is marked by a commitment to her own vision of success. A Wall Street Journal best-selling author of 3 books, Laura is also a frequent contributor to outlets including Oprah Daily and Forbes. She's a TEDx speaker as well. What I love about this episode is just being in the presence of somebody that has really taken action and followed her heart and has not settled in any way. So she is constantly pivoting. She's constantly being introspective about what really serves her and the life she wants to lead. And she comes up with frameworks and practical, tactical tools for you to take away and apply these concepts to your own life. With that, Laura Gassner-Otting, welcome to Level Up Podcast. Laura, thank you so much for joining the Level Up Podcast. How are you?
I'm great. I'm thrilled to be here.
I'm so excited to have you. There's so much to unpack because you have such an interesting background. Do you mind sharing a little bit about your White House experience and how you sort of became, I guess, an entrepreneur after being in sort of an employee role? I know a lot about your background. I don't want to spoil it for folks listening, but can you walk us through a brief history of your colorful background for folks to appreciate?
Sure. Yeah. Well, so it all started off when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and I decided that I was going to run for office and solve all the problems in the world. And I grew up in the 80s and in LA law and Ally McBeal, and it seemed very glamorous to be a lady lawyer. So I was going to go to law school, and the idea was go to law school, become work for the attorney general, prosecute the bad guys, get recruited to run for office, of course, win, and solve all the problems in the world. And then I got to law school, and on the very first day, realized that I had made a huge mistake and I didn't belong there. And so I did what a lot of young women do when we find ourselves in very miserable situations, is that I dated the world's worst boyfriend. And I like to joke around that the world's worst boyfriend had exquisite taste in about 3 things. The first being mullets and IROC Zs. For real. The second, obviously, being girlfriends. And the third being unknown presidential hopefuls from tiny southern states. And one day it was raining, and he was like, I'll give you a ride home in my IROC Z. Mullet, flying through the air. And he's like, but I want to stop at this guy's campaign office. He's running for president. And I was like, governor who? From where? Arkansas? Not a chance in hell. H.W. Bush had just won Desert Storm. He had like a 91% approval rating. The Democrats were like running a sacrificial lamb. And I was like, whatever, fine. We get to this tiny little campaign office in Gainesville, Florida. And in the corner, there's this little black and white TV that then Governor Bill Clinton was giving this impassioned speech about how there's nothing wrong with America that can't be fixed with what's right with America, something I still believe today. And that service is the answer, community service in exchange for college tuition. And like a lightning bolt, it hit me, this needs to happen. And so I started volunteering on the campaign, and all four principals, Bill and Hillary and Al and Tipper Gore, came to Gainesville, nowhere, Florida. We got 36,000 people to show up at a rally, and the National Campaign Office was like, who are those people? We need to hire them. Who are the volunteers? So I got hired onto the campaign, dropped out of law school, got hired onto the campaign. And by hired, I mean, I was paid all the ramen soup and ideals and I could eat, basically. But he ended up in the White House. I ended up getting to the White House. I can tell you more details about all of that if you want. But I spent 4 years in the White House helping create AmeriCorps, which is the community service program. 1.5 million young people have served in it. And 4 years into it, I was kind of itching to get back out of the campaign trail. And I went to go talk to my boss. And I was like, I'm ready, let's go. And he kind of said, in the way that only like a father figure mentor can say, you're kind of too old to get back on a campaign bus. I was like 24, 25 at the time, but it's like dog years, right? Like he's like, you can't sleep on high school gymnasium floors and eat cold pizza. And you're kind of too young to be the domestic policy advisor. So go work for my friend Arnie Miller. He runs the biggest search firm in the world that does specifically nonprofit university foundation advocacy type searches. He'll find you a job in a really good organization, and then you'll come back and do something big on Al Gore's campaign. And I was like, great, sounds good. Within 5 minutes of meeting with Arnie, I realized his office was in Boston, and the guy I was now dating, who was the world's best boyfriend, was about to move to Boston. So I was like, I should come work for you. And he's like, you should come work for me. And I was like, great. What do you do? And that's how I became a headhunter. So then I went to go work for him for 5 years, really learning from the best and the brightest how to do this work at the highest possible levels, until I had this moment where I realized that the way that I was incentivized as an employee for this organization really was not in the best interest of my clients. And once I realized that I wasn't part of their solution, it left me being only part of their problem. And that was untenable for me. So I walked into his office and I was like, there's a better way to do this work. And he was like, there's the door. You can stay, but you got to do it our way. And if you want to do it your way, you got to leave. So I left. And I started my own firm, and I ran that for 15 years. We grew at 100% year over year over year. And at the 10-year mark, I got a little bored. I was sort of tired of carrying the firm over the hill of innovation over and over and over again. And I decided I needed an exit plan. So 5 years later, I sold the firm to the group of women who helped me build it. And I did a TEDx talk, and I wrote a book, and then I wrote another book, and that brings us to today.
Wow.
So we can talk about any of that you want to get into.
Yeah, no, that was a wonderful, thank you for that quick summary of all of your incredible achievements and milestones. And I got to go through both your books, which has been amazing. And I can't wait to dive into those. I guess just going back briefly to the White House, what was something that was the most surprising thing? I mean, I can't imagine. I was sitting there thinking, what is that like to be inside the White House being like, oh my gosh, I'm here, I'm working, there's a president. Like, how do you even reconcile that? What is something you learned? What did it do for you professionally, personally? What insights do you have from that experience?
It's a weird place to work. I don't know if you ever watched The West Wing, but it's very similar. Like Dee Dee Myers, who was the press secretary under Clinton, was one of the advisors on The West Wing. And I've had a lot of friends who are like, was it like that? And I'm like, yeah, like I was Donna Moss, basically. Like I was, I was basically the administrative assistant who also had to do like some thinking about stuff, but was mostly an admin person. I was 21 years old. I didn't know my head from my ass. I literally walked in on the very first day wearing my mother's hand-me-down suits. Like I didn't have professional clothes. I didn't know what to do. And I walked in the first day having dropped out of law school, like at University of Florida, which great, University of Florida, awesome school. But I was surrounded by these like young and hungries who all went to Harvard and Yale and Princeton. And not only that, they like knew each other from like some weird secret society of fancy smart people who also like went to college, like high school, college prep boarding schools together. Like their relationships were so deep, they were impenetrable. Like I felt like I had just come off the onion truck. Like I literally was just like I dropped in from Mars. And and the way that I got there was on the campaign trail. I got to know a bunch of people who also worked on the campaign trail. And one of them ended up being the head of sort of volunteer affairs at the White House, which means they're the ones who like bring in the people who like answer the phones and do all the volunteer stuff. And on the first day, he basically said, there's an opening in political affairs. Do you want to come in? And I was like, okay. So I started answering the phones. And the next day I went to go work in national service and I was doing data entry. And so I volunteered for like 6 weeks doing data entry. And then the head of the office came up to talk to me. There were like 15 people in this office. The guy who ran the office, the guy by the name of Eli Siegel. And Eli, he ran the 92 campaign. He could have been the ambassador to France. He could have had any cushy job he wanted to have after the victory. But he said, I want to run national service. I want to create that program. And so he did. And he just believed in young people. So I was there like doing data entry for 6 weeks, and he walked up to me one day and he's like, "Hi, I'm Eli Siegel." And I was like, "You, big deal. Like I know who you are, right?" But he was so humble that he introduced himself to me. And then he said, I've been thinking about this question, and I wonder if you want to do some research on it. It occurs to me that Kennedy's Peace Corps was successful from the moment he announced it, whereas Johnson's war on poverty was a failure before he even got out of the starting blocks. Can you go find out why? Because I want this program to be successful. Okay, like what? You're asking me? Like, I don't know. So I was like packing up my stuff and trying to figure out like how I do this whole thing. And what I realized was that it does matter if you're like fancy and you got the dog-eared New York Times and the your grandfather's old satchel that he carried to all of his fancy Harvard things, but just showing up every single day and being eager and being interested and being interesting gets you really far in life. Like you don't necessarily, just because you're not starting from 17 steps ahead of the start line doesn't mean that you don't get to the finish. And so just getting to see that play out in a way that I could have agency in my career from a very early stage was probably the most important lesson I took from it. The second most important lesson I took from it is that everybody puts on their pants one leg at a time. Like I remember I was on my way into the Oval Office to brief the president about what he was going to talk about in the State of the Union, because he was going to talk about AmeriCorps and some of the AmeriCorps members that were sitting next to the First Lady. And right before I walked in, Willie Nelson walked out. And it's like Willie Nelson, right? And I looked at him, and my father is like a Jewish surgeon from Brooklyn, but for whatever reason, he loves Willie Nelson. And he like walked down. I was eye to eye with Willie Nelson because he's not that tall, and I was like, I know every word to every one of your songs because my father's your biggest fan. And he looks at me dead in the eye, goes, "That's good. That's real good." And then he walked away. And then I had to like recompose myself to like walk into the Oval Office and talk to the president. But like, who cares about the president of the Oval Office when you just talk to Willie Nelson?
Willie
right?
Nelson. That
So
is
it's just
amazing.
like there is an adventure around every corner, and like you never know when like elephants are come marching down the street. Like it's just anything can happen, and it's really just up to us to make it happen.
Wow. Well, that's something that strikes me with you is that, first of all, just going back to quitting, just the idea of quitting law school, that alone is wild. And just taking that alone and taking that level of risk. I mean, getting into law school is no easy feat. It is no joke. And for you to have the confidence to be like, no, I need to take this chance, like that to me shows like you are courageous. And can you speak a little bit about the courage that it takes to
Yeah,
be so amazing?
maybe. Maybe, right? Like I dropped out of law school, but first I took a leave of absence, right? And my parents, who are not the most flexible people in the world and had a very specific idea about what success should be for me, were not thrilled. I had saved up enough money during college that I actually took a trip overseas. And I remember calling my parents from a basement payphone at a hostel in Vienna, because I was like, they can't find me here. They can't kill me. So I'm going to call them and tell them from here. And I took a leave of absence. The dean of the school was like, you can take a leave of absence, but this is the worst mistake you'll ever make. It's good for a year. And I was like, okay, cool. And I left. Like, so I didn't, my parents, when I finally decided I was going to leave, they basically said, we'll give you 6 months of rent. And by the way, rent at that time was like $250 a month, and like half of my super disgusting basement apartment in DC with like the roaches and the mice. So they gave me 6 months of $250 a month, and they said, and everything else, food, alcohol, travel, like it's on you, right? So I was pretty incentivized, but I did have a little bit of privilege and luxury to, have a little bit of space to do it. But it's really scary. I think the other thing is that I was basically flunking out of law school because I didn't want to be a lawyer. I didn't want to be there. You know that student that gets called on in the movies in the very first day of class and gets asked question after question after question until they like basically decompose in a pile of tears and embarrassment? That was me. Torts 101. And I got asked questions for like 40 minutes. And it was probably one of the most traumatizing experiences I've ever had in my life. And what I came to realize, and honestly, I think my book Limitless stems from this experience, is you can't be insatiably hungry for someone else's goals. I just didn't care. I didn't want to be a lawyer by that point. I didn't want to be there. And so I didn't do the work. I even when I did the work, it didn't stick in my brain. So I think a lot of times what looks like courage in hindsight is like organ failure rejection, right? Like we are running away from something rather than running towards something. And then because we live in the society we live in, everybody rewrites the history, where revisionist history as if it was the plan the whole time. Like I think that does us a disservice. And so I almost like overcorrect people when they're like, you're so courageous. I'm like, no, I wasn't courageous. I was failing. I was failing. I had to, they would have kicked me out if I didn't quit. Like I quit, midway through the first semester, but I would have flunked out like at some point. Like it wasn't for me. And I had been following this definition of success that I thought I created myself, but really I'd been given. And I think that happens to us all too often.
It does. And I know you speak a lot about children, which I do want to ask you about probably towards the back half of this, but thank you for sharing that as well. But I think that story is so powerful, and just that glimpse of like, no, I was doing something and I was going through the motions, but my heart wasn't into it and I wasn't doing well at it. So I kind of found something else that I was interested in, took that next step. I think that alone, I mean, it's shocking to hear. Like, I'll give you an example. I will tell you, I've personally had employees that would sit through meetings and complain about, oh, we have to do this. This isn't important of all the things we have on our plate, so on and so forth. And it's like, finally, I'm like, I want to coach you for a moment. Let's just pause the meeting. I want to be 100% real with you as a friend. Okay. If you're not happy in this job, I highly suggest you find another one. And I'm saying that because you deserve to be happy and you deserve
Yes.
to be in a place that you're excited to be at. And if it's not here, I can guarantee there's a million other jobs with your skills that you can go and find that will really serve you and you'll be happy at. And I think that took, that a lot of people, a team, several people looking at me kind of like, did she really just say that?
Yeah.
And this is, by the way, it happened to be one of our top, performing employees, but the complaining all the time was taking away from people that wanted to be there. And
Oh, yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
it's not fair.
the hardest and best firing I ever did was our top performing salesperson at my search firm,
Wow.
because I mean, the toxicity of that person who, they keep showing up in your office like every 6 months, like, what have you done for me lately? And I deserve this and I deserve that. And it's like, no, that's not the culture that we're building here. That's not good for you. It's not good for me. It's not good for anybody.
No.
And I, I spent 20 years in executive search, right? Advising people on how to do hiring really, really well. And yet for myself, it was it was hard. It was hard because I would hire for skills and not necessarily culture fit. And man, culture fit trumps all. It is
Yes, it
super
does.
important.
I agree with you. Well, and the reason why I bring up that example is because I'm a huge believer, and one of my things that I talk about too is like I see that there's a lot of people out there that might be in an unhappy position, and I understand that leaving a position, like especially if that's your income and you have kids and it gets harder as you take on more. I understand that it's harder to kind of just move on to the next thing, but I really feel that people are just, they're either lazy or they are afraid to
Yeah.
really, they're
Yeah.
too lazy to roll up their sleeves and make a real change because that requires work. Or two, they're just afraid. They don't have the confidence. And you strike me as somebody that you are a woman that I really resonate with because you're a woman that leads and you're resilient, you're resourceful, but you are able to marry the heart and the work. And so I
Yeah.
guess to that end, can you share with folks that haven't yet gotten their hands on your books that I enjoyed so much? Can you talk a little bit about your definition and the importance of consonance and what that means to you in the four C's?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I spent 20 years in executive search, and it was my job to call the most successful people in the world and recruit them away on behalf of my clients. So I would call them because they were super successful, but they weren't very happy, which is why they all called me back. And I was fascinated by this idea that success doesn't always bring happiness. So I started to think about the people who I was not able to recruit away. And I also started to think about my own career. And when I decided to leave things like leaving law school, leaving the White House, leaving the big firm, selling my own firm, right? When did I decide that I wasn't interested in it anymore? And it was always in these moments where I didn't have consonance, I didn't have alignment, flow, harmony, right? Where the very best of what I did wasn't being brought upon to solve a problem that I cared about. And I wasn't being rewarded in ways that were personally, financially, karmically meaningful to me, right? So those are the three things. The very best of what you do is being called upon. The problem is something you actually care about solving, and you're being rewarded for it a way that is meaningful to you. And if you don't have those three things, then what you do doesn't match who you are, and you're not bringing the very best of everything you are to everything you do. So how are you going to be happy if you don't have that, right? You may have success, you may have temporary happiness, but you're not going to have this sort of fulfillment. And so what I realized was that the people who had both success and happiness had consonance, as I mentioned, alignment, flow, the sort of harmony in their lives. And it was really made up of four things. The first being calling. So what is the gravitational force in your life that gets you up? What is the business you want to build, the leader you want to serve, the societal ill that you want to solve, the family you want to nurture, right? Like, what is your calling? Number two, do you have connection? Does the work that you're doing every single day actually get you closer to that calling or farther from that calling? What's in your inbox, your to-do list, your calendar? Are those things actually moving you towards that calling? Is your work connected? Number three, contribution. Connection's all about the work. Contribution's really all about you. So does this work contribute to the life you want to have, the lifestyle you'd like to live, the flexibility you're looking for, the luxury that you want, the values you want to manifest on a daily basis? Does this work contribute to the life? And then lastly is control. How much personal agency do you have? How much control do you have over how much the work connects to your calling and contributes to your life? And for each one of us at every age and at every stage, we want and need different amounts of these. So when my kids were little, I didn't necessarily need a ton of calling, but I needed a lot of control because I needed to sort of be able to be there for pickup, et cetera. Now that, my kids are older and they're out of the house, I don't need as much control. So I want the work to really matter to me deep down. Those are just two examples, but for each one of us, and I have an assessment online about this that you can link to, that how much we want and how much we need really matter. So like, for example, if you don't want any calling and you have no calling, awesome. That's great. If you need a ton of control, but you don't have any control, not so awesome. So it really depends on how much you need at this point in your life and how much you actually have. And then there are things that we can do to change ourselves, change our workplace, change our career in order to get more of that consonance for where we are today.
Yeah, I love that. And I have definitely experienced this because you speak about, what if success doesn't equal happiness? And I've had some really amazing jobs. And to your point, I think you nailed it when you're like, if all four of these pieces are not in place, you're not going to feel fully aligned. You're not going to have that full level of happiness. And I think what's hard about, let's just say, being successful in like a corporate setting is you have to fight tooth and nail, not only for your education and then just to get the job and then to climb the ranks. But the thing that's so off-putting is that you can get to the top and make a ton of money, more money than you ever thought in many cases, and even be relatively happy. You might even relatively like enjoy the people, like nothing is necessarily having to be like blatantly wrong. And I actually think that makes it much harder to really dig even deeper and push yourself out of that comfort zone to say, but is this it? Because I think that's where people get very complacent. It's like, well, it pays my bills. I like my life, but they're not truly either connected or one of those pieces is missing and they just kind of accept it. Like, what do you say to people that are just sort of sitting back, accepting it?
Yeah, so I think there's two things that are happening. I think the first is that we're handed a definition of success when we're young. 16, 17, 18 years old, somebody says, pick a path, pick a major, pick a college, pick a trade, right? Pick a career. And we go, okay, right? And we do. I'm going to be a lawyer, right? Like we pick a thing, a box. And the problem is that when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, you don't have a frontal lobe. Like the part of your brain that dictates good, logical, sound decision making doesn't fully form until like 10 years later. So we're asked to make this decision that's going to impact the very rest of our lives before we literally have the capacity to make a good one. So the first thing is that we are chasing a goal that we're not actually hungry for. Where you can't be insatiably hungry for somebody else's goals, and we're chasing somebody else's goals because we're either, why did I want to be a lawyer? Because I watched Ally McBeal on television and Susan Day on LA Law, and it seemed like, as I mentioned, really, really exciting. So I'm chasing somebody else's goal, somebody else's idea. And then we wake up one day and we're like, oh, is this all there is, right? I'm 26, 36, 46, 56, 66, and I'm in the middle of my life. And I'm like, I don't know. But we're afraid to change because the life that we created and the success, the definition is filled with the trappings that are meaningful to other people, right? So like you have the car and you have the house and you have the spouse and you have the clothes in exactly the right size. You can't deviate from that because you've built an entire community that believes that these are the trappings that make you acceptable to the community. That's a problem because a lot of times you sit back and you're like, well, if I don't care about these trappings, do I care about this community? Do I really belong here or should I be doing something else? And then you run into a friend at a coffee shop and you tell them like this crazy, big, hairy, scary goal that you have that you want to do something else. And they look at you with horror in their eyes. And I had this experience when I sold my executive search firm. I ran into a friend at a coffee shop and she's like, what are you going to do next? And I was like, I don't really know. And she didn't know what to do with me because suddenly there wasn't a box for her to put me in. She like I was free floating in her mind outside of the filing cabinet where you put all the people, and she didn't know what to do with me floating around in there, and she just like it was like she short circuited. She didn't know what to do. And what I realized is that as I started telling people these big crazy goals that I actually did have, they would look at me either with love, like, I'm worried about you, I'm afraid you're going to fail, I don't want to see you get hurt, because like they were my parents, and like the last time I took a chance was like in high school biology, right? Like they love me but they don't know me. So either they love you or they're envious of you, and so they look at with the envy because they're worried that you're going to rise. They're used to you being smaller because it's sort of you being smaller helps them be bigger. Or they look at you with fear and they go, oh, you can't do that, that's too scary. And what they really mean is, oh, I can't do that, I'm too scared. Or you are this existential threat, like you deciding to leave the partner track, or you deciding to sell the company, or you deciding to completely like go leave sales and go into nonprofits, or whatever it is. It threatens everything that they hold dear. Like if you're not going to do that, what does that say about me and the sacrifices I've made to do that? And so we have to be really careful as we're thinking through changing our definition of success, whose advice and opinions we take. Because the problem is that we often give votes in our lives to people who shouldn't even have voices, either because they've been there historically or they're just there randomly. but they're not there intentionally. And so my advice to somebody who is stuck and trying to figure out, do I make this change? Do I not make this change? Is first, think about where the definition came from. And second, think about who you're running that definition through and whose advice you're getting about whether or not you can change it.
Yes, I love that. And I've had that same experience as I've changed my career path. And you nailed it. That's exactly right. And I have no problem just looking at them. And I mean, sometimes they even make negative comments, right? Which is like, oh, well,
Always they make negative comments.
yeah.
Always. It's more likely than not. Yeah.
Yeah, which is a little shocking because you're like, wait, I thought we were friends. Like, and sometimes it'll be like,
Or my favorite, I love that for you.
yeah,
Like,
right. Or, oh,
what is
everyone's
that?
doing this. Yeah.
Yes.
So, in those settings for me, it's like, I completely agree. Like, it's all about the cues and knowing who you're letting into your psyche to like inform your decisions. Because the reality is, if you're going to be courageous enough to like pivot, ABC thing. I mean, maybe it's not even your career. Maybe it's like a divorce or, where you live or whatever, your kid's school change, whatever it is. It's like, I do think a big, takeaway for folks listening is it's not about everybody else. It's not.
Yeah. And
It's
you know what
about you.
happens? Yeah. Like the moment somebody says, are you sure you should do that? Aren't you worried about? And they like, aren't you worried about? And then they like lob into your brain some little like cancerous idea. Like, aren't you worried
Mhm.
about finances? Or aren't you worried about your kids not having any friends in the new school? Or aren't you worried about? And they just like ding, they like
Yep.
toss it into your brain. And
Yes.
then just like you floating free in their brain, that idea floats free in your brain. And then suddenly it takes root and it forms like a little cancer. And the minute something goes wrong, you're like, oh, maybe they were right.
Yep.
Oh, and then you get scared and then you don't problem solve because you're like, oh, they were right. I shouldn't have done this. Maybe I overstepped. I was out over my skis. I'm an imposter. I don't belong here, right? All of that stuff because it's rushing into your brain. So I I I I I don't not tell people about fun, exciting things I'm doing. I just choose when to bring them into the story. So with my parents, for example, I love my parents, but again, they don't know what I'm capable of because they don't see me on a daily basis. So I kind of tell them about things when I'm like a little bit further into the planning, like when I know that it's real, so that when they come at me with their little army of like, but what abouts? I can already have some of those answers because I already know how it goes, right? I'm 53. I've like reinvented myself enough times that I know that they're going to ask me certain questions. And I don't tell the sort of frenemies things until much further down. They can just see me on social media. They can see what happens. Like, they've got some ideas about me. Fine. See me on Good Morning America this weekend, like whatever. So I think I'm not saying like, don't tell anybody and like, succeed in secret. I'm just like, be careful who's on your board of directors and be careful when you hold those meetings because not everybody gets to advise you all the time about everything.
I love that. I think that is so smart. And I think that is so important because just like you said, like it could be a fly, like somebody could say something and not even realize that they just inserted something incredibly negative into your life that is actually going to be like festering. And
Oh God. And like I have a huge rejection issues. Like I don't have anxiety, I don't have neuroses, I don't have depression. I don't have like there are a lot of things that people have in the world. Like I don't have those things, but I have this thing, right? Like we all have something, right? Like Robin Roberts says, everyone's got something. I have rejection issues. Like I'm like, oh, what if they don't like me? What if they secretly kick me out of their little club? And I have huge rejection issues. So when somebody's like, aren't you afraid that they're not going to like you? I'm like, oh, like they might as well stab me in the heart, even though they don't
right,
even know that that's my issue.
right.
So like I think like I don't think people mean to be as mean as they are, but sometimes they're pretty mean. And in these moments when we are most insecure, their knives stab the deepest.
We
So
do.
like, the other thing that people can do if they're stuck and they want to make a change, but they're not courageous enough or they don't have the time or the money or the flexibility to do it now is this thing I call side quests, which you read about in Limitless. So a side quest is I'm not a video game player, but my son at the time was I guess he still is a video game player, but the son at the time was really into it. He was like 13. And I was having a really bad day and not able to get a chapter written in my book. And he was like, well, why don't you go on a side quest? And I was like, what's that? And he's like, well, if like you want to play a video game with your friend, and the point of the video game is to go to the castle, slay the dragon, and save the princess, but you can't get on the video game yet because you finished doing dishes, but your friend hasn't finished doing dishes, so you got to wait for him. While you're sitting around waiting for him in the waiting room of the video game, you're a farmer, so you can till your wheat, you can take it to the market, you can sell your wheat, you can buy a sword, you can buy a horse, you can buy a potion, so that when he finally signs on, you can jump on the horse, go to the castle, slay the dragon, and save the princess. And he was like, so why don't you just have side quests, like read a book or watch a TED talk or do some research or, write up your bibliography or like all the other things that you need to do, which will help move the project forward, even if you're not taking the big step. And I was like, you should be writing this book, not me. Right. Like it was like so profound. So I always tell people, like, if you feel like you're stuck, like, how do you make your own luck? You make your own luck by saying yes, by putting yourself in the deal flow, by learning about opportunities, by doing the research so that when opportunity comes along, you're ready to get on the horse, go to the castle, and slay the dragon. So if you want to get unstuck, but you're feeling stuck right now, the best thing you can do is all the side quest things, like listening to podcasts just like this, reading books, watching TED Talks, having informational interviews, writing out a budget and figuring out what like the must make number, the need to make number, and the want to make number are, right? Like all the stuff you can do that isn't actually taking any risks or putting yourself out there or doing anything that's scary yet. You're just gathering all the information so that when your friend finishes the dishes, you can jump on the horse, go to the castle, slay the dragon, and save the princess.
1000%. 1000%. I think it's a lot of like, you can quietly prepare and start moving in the direction you want without posing a threat to your status quo until you have all your ducks lined up in a row and you know when the moment is right. And then you can take that, big action, leave that job, make the move, switch your kid's school, whatever it is.
And by the way, the moment's never right, right? Like you're never going to have a complete data set. You're never going to have all the information. It's never going to be perfect. And my favorite study from Wonder Hell is the coin flip study, where they did a study of people who flipped a coin when they were facing big decisions. Should I get married? Should I get divorced? Should I take the job? Should I buy the house? Like big life decisions. And what they learned was that the people who flipped a coin, the coin said heads, go for it, were fundamentally happier than the people who flipped a coin and the coin said tails, don't go for it. Even if they said in hindsight it was the wrong decision. So a few months later, they said, I'm not any worse off. And 6 months later, they said, I'm fundamentally better off. And even it was the wrong decision. Why? Because action beats stagnation. So the information that we get, the knowledge that we learn, the sliding door moment of like, I left that job, it was the wrong decision, but I met my husband in the new job, right? Like there's always other things that happen. So don't wait, because in the waiting, you are stealing from yourself all of the potential magic that's also out there.
Yes. I also love, and I know that you do this through your action, not just through your words, which I am very inspired by as well, is this idea of really putting yourself out there and putting yourself in situations to create your own luck. And I think it's very easy, especially if you're starting in a new direction. It's very easy to get down about something or to feel isolated, but you have to find opportunities. And sometimes it's like a mental, it takes mental strength to really get the guts to do this. And you have to reach out and grab for other people and really put yourself in situations where you're in with the right people. And here's an example, me launching my media company. I found a conference that's local. I had never been to the conference. I didn't know a soul at the conference. I really didn't have any idea even where I would fit into the conference. And like, I committed. I committed to going. I grabbed a sponsorship opportunity and we went, and it's just one thing leads to the next, but sitting home and like sitting in fear and being afraid and all of that is definitely not the winning strategy.
Sitting home leads to nothing. And what I say to people is like action beats stagnation, but that action can be sitting at home for a certain time, right? A very specific time window that you are going to use to gather a certain amount of information, knowing that you won't have full. But so research and knowledge, that's okay. But like once you've done the research to know that this is a conference that's worthwhile for you to be at, and these are the levels of sponsorship, and this is what you expect as a result, and here's what you need to do, it's time to just do it. Like just
Oh,
do it already. And by the way, if you don't do it, if you're always too busy to do it, it might not actually be a goal you care about. Like I always say, busy's bullshit. Like every time somebody says, "Oh, I'm too busy to train for a marathon," well, maybe you don't
yes.
really want to run one. That's
Yeah.
okay. I'm too busy to go back to graduate school. Well, maybe you don't know what you're going to do with the graduate degree yet. That's okay. I'm too busy to, watch my nutrition and lose those extra, 20 pounds. Well, maybe you don't care about the shape of your body, and that's okay too. Like whatever. I don't care. Like it's your life, right? So I think that we say that we're busy, and what we really should say is, I'm not interested in prioritizing that right now.
I,
So fine, great. Pick something you are interested in prioritizing and
yes.
go after that. But go
Yes.
after something. Like you got one short time on planet Earth. Get
Yes, I
going.
love that. I think that the authentic passion is so important. I guess I have a question for you. What do you say to the entrepreneur that has all the three C's, say that they did rip off the Band-Aid, they left their safe, secure job to pursue a passion, and it's not bringing income in, and they have their savings and they're fine, but their their business model maybe isn't tweaked and optimized yet, and they're not really bringing in the income yet. Like, when do they quit? What do they do to move out of like a stuck scarcity mindset? Like, any tips you have for somebody that's kind of starting off and it's not all coming together as easily as they were hoping?
Yeah. Well, I would say welcome to the club. I don't think it comes together as easily as anybody hopes ever. Um, Entrepreneurship is not for the faint of heart. It is terrifying. It is like a roller coaster ride every single day. And it depends on your industry. I mean, I think there's some industries where somebody needs to work for 5 years before they start turning a profit. I think there's some where it's 5 weeks. So it really depends on the industry specific. I will tell you the story of me, and the scariest moments that I had when I was running my company is that we would do these projects that were like 3 to 6 months in length, and then they'd be done, right? So a client would call us, they'd hire us, we'd work for them for 3 to 6 months, they'd pay us during that time in a retainer model, and then they'd go away. So we had to resell our entire book of business basically every 4 months to like keep the company afloat. And there were some months where the phone didn't ring, and it was really terrifying, especially like come July when we were finishing up some projects that we started in the beginning of the year, and we had nothing at all for the second half of the year. And I had a staff of 37 that I had to figure out, like, how am I going to pay them? What am I going to do? And then one day I was like, okay, there has to be some rhyme or reason to this. So I went back over, I think we were like 6 years maybe into the company at this point. And I went back and I found the data of the dates of inquiry of every single client, and then the date of contract of every single client. So what percentage of the inquiries did we sell? How long did it take from the ones that we did sell to know like that they were going to contract, right? So like what was the length of the sales cycle, and what were the dates of these things? And what I found was that we sold probably 85% of our business every year during one specific month in January, or one specific week in January, one specific week in April, one specific week in July, and one specific week in December. Because our clientele, that's when they were making budget decisions. And once I knew that, I was like, okay, we're getting to the end of this project in July. I have 6 years of data telling me that we're going to sell probably like 20% of our annual income in the second week of August. So by the way, staff, go take your vacation right now. So it just allowed me to make better decisions. And I think a lot of entrepreneurs make decisions based on emotion, because you think you're only as good as the last sale, or only as good as the last customer, or the last interaction, when really it's really important to gather facts. And as you gather the facts, you can make better decisions that way with more perspective and more longevity. Now, if you're just starting and it's not working out as well, then what do? You go to your competitors, you go to your colleagues, and you say, look, let's have a conversation. Like, when do you sell? Like, how does it work? What's your biggest, and talk to them about it. And what you'll find is that even though you are competitors with some people, like the reason you started your company is because you do something just a little bit differently than them. So there will be people who will be happy to talk to you, or who are further along, or maybe who sold their company, or want to give you back some mentoring advice. There are people that you can talk to, but I think facts have a hard time not beating emotions when you lay them all out.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's so you're so resourceful. And I think that is one of the most important skills in life. And that's something I know I'm definitely focused on with respect to my children. And I also noticed that you have a lot of insights with children. Now, I have 3 children, and there's something that you talk about that I really want to hear you speak on further, which is just accepting your kids for who they are and leaning into who they truly are. And I'll give you an example. So one of my kids, not as athletic. And I realized about myself, like in my mind, I thought, oh, I'm always going to connect with my kids for through a multitude of things, but one of them being sports, right? When they're younger, especially. I have 8, 7, and 2. And so it almost feels like I'm being robbed of that experience with one child that is not really that athletic. And what I started to say was like, okay, and this connects this concept of passion too, is like, I can't want this more than you. So I would like you to share if there is a sport that you like. You don't have to be the best. I actually don't care if you're the best or the worst. I need your best focus and effort. But more importantly, I want you to build confidence. I want you to understand teamwork. There's character building traits in this experience that are important. Tell me a sport that you would like or another activity that you would like, and trying that on, as opposed to, hey, we're going to go play basketball, and then groaning and moaning and not performing and all of that. So what advice do you have for those of us that have an idea of what our children are meant to be, and then they show up and you're like, you're not that at all. Now what do I do?
I saw a meme on Instagram just a few days ago where it was like, "Mom, quote, you're not the daughter I raised. Daughter, quote, I'm not the result you expected." And I was like, or maybe I'm not the result you desired or something. And I was like, oh my
Oh,
God, you might
that's
as well
it.
like hit me with like a 2x4 to the head.
Right.
So I have one um, strategy of parenting. I've only one, and everything else stems from this one. And it's this: you either get on their bus or you get run over by their bus.
Hmm.
But you don't get a choice where the bus is going.
Hmm.
Maybe every once in a while you get to suggest a route. Maybe every once in a while they let you pick the music. But if you don't get on their bus is going where their bus is going, whether you're on it or not. Now, if you have a kid who's like, hitting up the bottle at 13 years old and like getting in with bad kids, obviously you got to step in. But like, for most of the people listening to this, like, this is like the kid's dropping out of the football team when you thought he was going to like go to college on a football scholarship. Well, maybe college isn't the thing he wants. Maybe football's not the thing he wants. Like, maybe have a conversation, because if you don't get on their bus and have conversations, then their bus goes on without you, and then you don't get to influence anything. So as long as you stay on the bus, you get to be able to influence the route and the radio station and all of that. Yeah, you get lots of determination and grit and teamwork and all of that from sports, but you also get it from being the stage manager of a theater production. Like, there's tons of ways that you can get that, and your kid's going to be your kid. Like, I think we can have all the arguments we want about nurture versus nature, but I have 2 boys that were born 2 years and 4 days apart, pretty much the same like socioeconomic inputs. Like, it wasn't like we had money with one and not with the other, right? Like, it was like we had the same lifestyle, and one is dirty, sweaty boy, as much as you can be, and the other one is like theater, dance, arts. Like, they're just totally different humans. They come out of the womb, I think, like 90% who they are,
Oh, I
which is
agree
good news
with
because it means you can only kind of screw them up like so much. But like, you can do a lot of screwing up on the 5% on either side, but you can also kind of help them along. But I think I think what a gift it is to have incredibly different humans living in your house, and you get to have different conversations with them and do different things with each of them, and you get to relate to them. And then they also don't compete with each other if they're not doing the same things. But I think you got to get on their bus, and
that.
and you got to go to where they are. So like, um if your kid is, my younger son is interested in figuring out how to brew his own kombucha, and he invited my husband to go with him to a kombucha class next weekend, and my husband's like, I don't really like kombucha, but like, I'm going because he invited me. Like, the answer's always yes, right? It's like, Mom, do you want to go somewhere? You don't say like, well, where are we going to go? How are we going to get there? It's like, yes. Then you're in the car, and then when you're in the car driving away, you're like, so where are we going, right? Because you're already there. Like, I try to reduce the friction by um not throwing up all the reasons we shouldn't do things, and more just kind of go to where they are, let them invite me in. And then once they've invited me in, then I can like influence from inside.
I love that. I think that is so smart. And I agree. And I can see that when you fast forward and you see, like, I'm sure all of us have a friend that they are not close. I'm thankfully very close with my parents, but so I'm not speaking on my, on behalf of myself, but we've all had a friend that is not close with their parents because their parents don't accept their lifestyle one way or another, or who they are
Yes.
fundamentally. And so they've had to learn to like create distance so that they can live peacefully. So I
Look,
think,
I think there's a lot of like there's like a million billion miles between being loved and being seen.
mm,
Right. So like um I started therapy like 4 years ago, and I'd never had therapy in my life. I think therapy's great. I think everybody should get assigned a therapist at birth. We should like pipe it through the HVAC system. Like it's amazing. But I just never had it. I never felt the need for it. It wasn't something that I was talked about in my childhood. So I never did it. And on the very first appointment, the psychiatrist was like asking me all kinds of questions, like how many kids do you have? Where'd you grow up? How long have you been married? And then he said, "Did you feel loved as a child?" And I was like, yeah, I think so. I mean, yeah, like I was protected and cared for and guided. And yeah, yeah, I was loved. And then I left. And, we had a whole bunch of conversation after that. And I left. And that question kept sticking in my brain. I couldn't get the question out of my mind. And I went back 2 weeks later. I was like, I think you asked me the wrong question. Because there's a million miles between being loved and being truly seen. And I was loved as a kid. Like you get good grades and you're nice to the neighbors and you do your chores and like you're a good kid. I love you. But did I feel like I could like fully fly my freak flag and like be who I wanted to be and do like unpopular things and still be loved and accepted by my parents, by my sibling, by the community, the schools that I went to? I don't know. It's not like I have any like weird like fetish things going on, but like there's like a norm, and especially
yeah.
when you're like in middle school and you're like scared to like do anything different than anybody else, and we all dress alike and act alike and talk alike, and I don't know that I necessarily felt seen by anybody around me, let alone by myself, because I didn't even know if I could explore that. And so I think the biggest gift we can give our kids is not just to love them, but to truly see them for who they are and not love them despite of it, but love them especially because of it.
Yes. Yes. I think that was the conclusion I got to. It's like, oh, you're not super athletic, but you can speak like a 40-year-old. You're,
Right.
totally different skill sets, not at all the same. And like, this is something that makes you so spectacular and so far outside of the norm that
And
it's
lucky
like,
you, mom, that you get to have that kid. How
yeah.
amazing is that?
Yeah. So I like that idea of accepting, the non-norm or this idea of what your kids should be.
Celebrating it.
Yes,
Celebrate.
leaning into it, really embracing it. And I think it's just something, it's great to remind parents out there that if your kid, you thought they were going to be ABC and then you realize they're DEF, like lean into DEF all day long.
Yeah.
Enjoy
And
that.
by the way, like your kid just taught you something. Like you thought you were connected to your kids on sports, and it turns out that you get to connect to them now in this way also. So, like the kid who is super articulate and talks like a 40-year-old, you now get to take that and maybe connect back to your other kids through that also, because you've just learned that there's additional ways to connect to your kids. Like, how lucky are we that we get to, like, I have people all the time like, your kids are so lucky to have you as a mom. And I'm like, what? I'm lucky to have them as kids. Like, it's great. I love them and I also like them because they're interesting humans, because people have been interested in them. And I think like boring, like people who are bored are just boring people. Like nobody's bored if they're like an interesting human. And the only way you
Right.
become interesting is if somebody rewards you and stokes you and celebrates you for being interested in things and doesn't just shut you down like, oh, it's not sports, I don't care, right?
That's
Like
right.
the fact that you're interested in him will actually light a fire under him to be more interested in lots of other things that are not normative around him. So
Yeah.
good job, mom.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Yeah, no, it's good. And I think the other thing is like it puts a little bit of it puts more onus on you as a parent to like roll up your sleeves and like figure out how to move differently. And I think some people might just like not wanting to be putting in that kind of work, like, oh, we're not going to go to football, so I don't know what else to do with you. Like it requires work of how can I channel you and nurture that strength in you. So
It
uh,
does and it doesn't, right? Like I think we think, oh, my kid is interested in Ballet. I guess I should learn everything there is to know about ballet. No, just be present. Like if they're watching some ballet something on TV, sit down next to them. Don't talk to them. Don't be an expert. Don't tell them all the things they're looking at. Just sit there and just side by side, right? Side by side. So there's no eyeball to eyeball confrontation. You're just side by side, and suddenly they'll start talking. And all you need to do is just ask questions. What do you like about this? Why'd you choose this one? Tell me something about this. Oh, which costume do you like? Depending on how old or how young they are. Tell me about the, the complexity of this choreography. Or like, do you like the pink tutu or the yellow tutu? Right? Like, just ask questions, and they bring you in to what they like. And then if you see something, you're like, oh, you like the pink tutu. I saw this other thing that had a pink tutu. I'm going to send it to you. And now you're having a conversation about that. And so, like, I think we have to be experts on everything, but really we just kind of like, the bar is pretty low. Like, put your phone away and just sit there silently and let them talk. Like, that's like 80% of parenting, is putting your
Wow.
phone away and just shutting the hell up.
I love that. Do you mind parenting my children? I have three. I have a surplus. You can take one, two, or three of them. Makes me
Well, I
like
have
such an
two,
amazing mom.
and I'm an empty nester now. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
they're 19 and 21. But like I said, like, you have three kids, I have two kids. We have together a sample set of five. So obviously we're not the experts, but like, I got good kids, so it's easy to be a good mom when you got good kids. Like, I didn't get kids who have, lots of developmental issues and, emotional stuff and allergies and this and that and the other. Like, they're pretty down the line. So it's, there are a lot of other parents who are dealing with a lot of more difficulty than me, but I just, like, we gave our kids cell phones when they were 12. And we had friends that gave their kids cell phones that gave them like 15-page contracts. Like, I get to see every one of your texts, and I'm going to look through all of your pictures and never send a picture of yourself to this, that, and the other. And I gave my kids a cell phone, and I was like, don't be an idiot. Don't be an idiot. You now own this brick. I make this brick connect to the internet by paying a bill. If you're an idiot, I stop paying the bill. Do you know what it means to be an idiot? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, what are you not going to do? And they told me. I'm like, what are you going to do? And they told me. I'm like, great. We have consensus. Done. I trust you. Please don't make me not trust you, because when I realize I can't trust you, then I can't trust you. And it's kind of like all or none. So don't make me have to be the parent who has to be that kind of parent. Cool? And they're like, cool. And I'm like, great.
I love
That's
that.
it.
I love
That's
that.
it.
That is amazing. Laura, I feel like I
I
could talk
think kids
to
will
you
rise.
for
I think they rise to the level of expectation. So I don't know.
I think
Expect a
so
lot.
too.
Anyway,
No, and I can see that you set that tone, and it's you're obviously a wonderful leader and a wonderful mother. And I really, really enjoy this conversation. I want to ask you, if folks want to work with you, what what capacity can you work with people or businesses, and what types of services or offers can they connect with you on?
yeah. So I make my living as a keynote speaker and as an executive coach, and as an author. So obviously they can buy books for team members. They can buy course licenses for themselves, for team members. They can bring me in to do a keynote, and they can hire me as an executive coach to either come in for their team or for their individuals over 3 months, a year, etc. Really around anything that has to do with getting unstuck and bringing everything we are to everything we do.
Oh, I love that. Oh my goodness. And for those of you listening that have not already poked around, I had the pleasure of getting to read Limitless as well as Wonder Hell. And these are, sorry, it might not be clear, but I'll post it on my Instagram and TikTok and all the places, LinkedIn. And they're really, really great books that you wrote. So congratulations. And thank you for writing those books, because they were truly helpful.
Thank you, Kimberly. I know that you are widely read and deeply read, and I appreciate you saying that.
Thank you so much. Thanks for coming on. And where else can folks find you?
So my name is Laura Gassner-Otting, and all my friends call me LGO. So I'm at Hey LGO, HEYLGO, on all the socials.
That's amazing. All right. Well,
And I
thank you
guess my
so much.
website is lauragasnerotting.com.
Okay. Well, we will
Yeah.
find you and follow her, you guys. She is so incredible. She's got TED Talks. This woman is it. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much, Kimberly. I appreciate it.
All right. that is it for today. Thank you very much for listening, and be sure to follow us at Iconic Nation Media and send us a direct message and comment on some of our posts so that we can hear your feedback and incorporate them into our show. We appreciate you listening, and we look forward to catching you next week.